What's up, everybody? I'm David Hain. Welcome to episode 173 of the A to D From Addict to Disciple podcast. I'd like to give a big shout out to our new listeners from Jamaica and the Czech Republic. That brings our total to 63 countries. Wow. If you want to help us reach more people in more countries, please subscribe, follow, and share the link with your friends wherever they live, or click on the support link in this episode's description. If you'd like to get our curriculum, you can get the paperback or ebook of From Ashes to Destiny on Amazon. When we come back, we'll get into this episode entitled Complicated Grief. Welcome back to episode 173 of the A to D From Addict to Disciple podcast entitled Complicated Grief. Today's episode is the result of hearing from guys who have worked the From Ashes to Destiny curriculum, identified and found healing for the wound which originally caused their addiction, established sobriety in their recovery, but continued to struggle to adjust to their life in recovery. And some of them have relapsed as a result of their thoughts and emotions in this struggle. As I've worked with these guys, I've found a common theme in them, and that is it's complicated grief over the consequences of their addiction. The most common consequence is the loss of their marriage and the ability to maintain relationship with their children. Some of the guys also battled the grief of realizing how much they hurt their children during the years of their addiction. For other guys, it's the loss of a career. Some talk about all the things they had that are gone, like a house, cars, expensive possessions, and family heirlooms. Are you getting the picture? This complicated grief that I'm describing is the feeling of hopelessness and helplessness to ever get back what has been lost as a consequence of our addiction. And the belief settles in that we'll never get a chance to have a family again or that life again. It reminds me of the words of the song MacArthur Park, sung by Richard Harris. And I'll just give you a brief snippet of the lyrics there. It says, "Someone left the cake out in the rain. I don't think that I can take it, 'cause it took so long to bake it. And I'll never have that recipe again." Can you hear the complicated grief in there? When we're the ones in our addiction who actually left the cake out in the rain, left the family out in the rain, and we've reached a point now where we don't think that we can take it because it took so long and we put so much effort and we were happy in that family before the addiction became our source of happiness. And here we are in recovery saying, I'll never have that recipe again. So as we look at this, I'd like to briefly see what this would look like using the model of the Russian dolls that we utilize in the From Ashes to Destiny curriculum. And simply I'll start at the smallest doll. So it's like these guys with complicated grief have a new core value, and complicated grief becomes their core value, and it's the grief about what was lost. Their belief is that they'll never get another chance to have it again. Their thoughts typically range from, I really screwed up, to, it's unfair, I never thought that this would happen to me, or other similar comments. Their feelings are staying stuck in depression. And all this fuels a behavior of repetitive relapse or continuously dipping and dabbing to comfort the pain of their grief, often without even knowing that that's the grief they're comforting. I turned to the Mayo Clinic online to get their description of this complicated grief disorder or complicated grief syndrome. And one of the things that they say is that it can settle in when we do not process our grief in a year or so after it's happened. And they really focus in the first year. And I think it's so critical when we realize we can lose all those things and we're still active in our addiction. We're numbing all of our pains and emotions, and many of us are so numb we're beyond feelings. So we don't even understand that grief is there. We just know it's gone, and we're just trying to stay alive one day at a time in our addiction. So for most addicts, no matter when you've established your recovery, we've skipped this aspect of processing our grief in the first year. And the Mayo Clinic says signs and symptoms of complicated grief in regard to what we lost could include things like intense sorrow, pain, and rumination, or continuing to bring up the same topics of pain to talk about again and again. Extreme focus on reminders of the past, or complete or excessive avoidance of those reminders. Another one would be intense and persistent longing and pining for those things that are gone. And problems accepting that that's the new reality. Some of us in complicated grief just settle into full detachment or numbness and withdraw from many, many aspects of life. Others reach that point and say, life holds no purpose or meaning, and I don't really have a reason to go on, so to speak. Others hold on to bitterness and anger at what happened, and that settles into a lack of trust in anyone else that comes into their life. And a common thing for almost everyone with complicated grief is the inability to think back on the positive experiences from the past and let them go and begin to enjoy life in the present. And I believe that the emphasis on getting clean and sober, on understanding our triggers, on establishing our recovery when we finally do reach out for treatment, can sort of push this whole issue of grief to the back burner, because we're focusing on staying clean and sober one day at a time. So it's really important to make sure, if you haven't covered your areas of grief for what you've lost, that we find a way to do that, because we need to process the normal aspects of grief before they turn into complicated grief, which can stick with us for years and could possibly result in us being mislabeled with chronic depression or bipolar, and we never process the grief. So what would the normal process of going through grief look like? Well, the most common model was developed by Swiss-American psychiatrist Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, who stated the 5 stages of grief, which I'll briefly explain here. The first stage is denial. This is where you typically are numb that this has happened, and you're in a state of shock about life. The next stage is anger. And this is a common stage as reality settles in. It's normal to think, why me? And life's not fair. You might look to blame others for the cause of your grief, and also may redirect your anger to close friends and family. The third stage is bargaining. And in this stage, you may try to negotiate with yourself or with a higher power to try to undo the loss and get what you've lost back. The fourth stage is depression. In this stage, you might withdraw from life, feel numb, live in a fog, and not want to get out of bed. You can get stuck in this depression and then get a prescription for meds for it as sort of a justification that this is the new you. But are you still using illegal drugs? Because somewhere deep inside, you know that you need to numb the pain that you're still grieving and are afraid to process and move forward in life. And the fifth stage is acceptance, and that is where you do begin to process this and move forward. Your emotions may begin to stabilize. You re-enter reality. You come to terms with the fact that the new reality is that those things you lost as a result of your addiction are gone, and you have to stop chasing after them. So, can you see the importance of going through the steps, these 5 stages? And in sort of a normal process, it can be a linear progression where a counselor or a mentor that you're working with can take you through each step one at a time. But in complicated grief, it looks like a whirlwind, and you bounce back and forth through all 5 stages in a meandering thing, almost like a whirlwind or a pinball inside a pinball machine, just getting bounced from one to another. And the stages are just the bumpers keeping the ball bouncing around endlessly. So, in closing, I want to make an offer to our listeners wherever you are in the world. If you are realizing that you're stuck in complicated grief, please contact me. I'm going to be starting some new groups just to cover this topic. And the focus will be on this topic and being able to process the grief to find healing. We'll use whatever form works for you, wherever you live in the world. If it's Zoom, WhatsApp, Skype, email, phone calls, I'm open to anything. Just reach out and contact me, and we'll get these groups going. Thanks for listening to this episode of the A to D from Addict to Disciple podcast. If you were listening and saying, that's me, please reach out. As I described just a minute ago, please reach out and let's get a group going. Also, if you have friends or family members that this was describing, reach out to them. The easiest way to start that might be to just give them the contact to our website. Again, that's www.froma2D.org. That's www.froma2D.org. And they can click on the podcast there. They can click on the curriculum From Ashes to Destiny. They can click on the contact page. And let's get this going and begin to undo the effects of complicated grief. Tune in Monday for our next episode. And as always, stay safe and stay strong.